The final area that we talked about is define the fictions and exercise wise judgments. I've got these two authors here that I think came up with very practical ways of managing some of the biases that we find ourselves in, or that we find ourselves being subject to. The first one is around resetting your mindsets. Second one is about rethinking your players. Third one is about rethinking the process, call it the policy, call it the operation, the way things are being done. And I think my own favorite is rethinking the game. These are all areas of consciousness, the thinking side of exercise and judgments. Once those are taken care of, then respond or perform. But I think even in the responding and performing, there can also be judgment involved, because these things are basically all happening at the same time. Often they are happening at the same time. Now, let's unpack them. We're saying reset your mindsets. The process really is about that deep dive, the deep unlearning. We are what we believe, the identity that we abide by. That can actually be the source of our bias and blind spots. Recognize the emotional filters of pain, the things that you have experienced in the past, which you say, I don't want to go through this again. Because maybe they are the ones that are creating or that are messing up your perspectives. They are limiting your options. Admit also your tendency to react negatively when your views are challenged. We tend to defend ourselves because we've got a certain identity. We've got our own pride. And just stop and say, hey, no, the reason why I'm now reacting badly is because I'm being challenged. But maybe I'm... Okay, so maybe I'm actually cutting out options. Learn to be conflict competent. You, as a leader, you will always have conflict. And sometimes you've got to say, this little boy, why is he challenging me? And he's in my house. Just listen, or find a way, a mature way of dealing with that. And sometimes invite yourself to argue against your own position. It helps if you want to change your mindset. Ask yourself, what are some of the uncertainties involved in your decision? Sometimes we are too confident. Overconfidence can be very disastrous. And treat all stakeholders as having legitimate views. Very critical if you want to change or to reset your mindsets. Moving on, rethink the players. This is about dealing with the collective unconscious. This is looking at what's happening in the team. One thing to look at is just look at the composition of your team. Are you not all people who think the same way or people who do the same way? Are they not all just simply clones of you? Because if it's like that, then you don't have a team. Recognize selective listening and selective recall in others. Are people only paying attention to things that they would like to hear? Identify those people who are good at boundary spanning. I like this idea of people who can boundary span, people who can put a foot on one side of the fence and put the other one on the other side, because these are people who can really upset set ways of thinking and come up with innovative ways of doing things. Find a sparring partner, someone who can challenge your thinking. These are people that are very helpful in teams. Honor those that speak up and shun praise singers. Often as leaders, we seek comfort from praise singers. They are the people that one should just simply run away from because they don't help. They might just give you comfort, but they don't help, honestly. And when you can see that there are cliques that are developing, find ways of encouraging partnerships. You might not be able to break them, but maybe let them collaborate, enable them to collaborate. Next area, rethink the process, the policy, or the operations. Clear the way. This is how you actually unclog those arteries, which could lead to a heart attack. How do you do that? Some of the points that have been raised are like, for instance, assign people to tasks on the grounds, on different grounds. Don't just simply say, oh, it's HR task, so let's give it to HR. Come up with a different way of doing things, because oftentimes when that happens, that person will go in there with fresh eyes. If you are in a meeting, absent yourself from the early discussions. Maybe even come late, because if you come in and you start expressing your views, you might clog the system. And in meetings, encourage questions that challenge the prevailing views. Ask questions of the team that unearth the underlying beliefs. What is it that is happening here? How are we taking this decision? Are we taking them because we are just simply basically looking at issues of cost? Or are looking at these things because we are trying to protect ourselves? Look at what are the underlying themes. Seek a second opinion as a final reality check, so that you don't necessarily go by blind spots or by judgments that are exercised through blind spots. And ideally also deploy responsive governance mechanisms, so that if you're wrong, you can be corrected. My favorite, I said, rethink the game. Is the ladder on the right wall anyway? Where are we going? Are we not going to nowhere? Some questions that you might want to consider, for instance, is if we disappeared, who could miss us? Who would miss us? Why? What would we do if all was possible? If we had all the means, what could we be doing? Let's not be limited by the difficulties that we're having. Let it not be COVID. Let it not be the sanctions. Let it not be the things that are difficult. What could we do? How can we make a better experiment? How can we try out things differently? What are we willing to sacrifice? Change the game. How can we become a cause and not just an organization? Something that really goes way beyond even us. Having gone through all that ways of mitigating and presumably gotten fresher perspectives, you can then perform. You can then develop an intervention. You can then execute, presumably with a smile. Now, having started off looking at the man in the corner office, maybe memory, you and I are in the business of selecting leaders. Mm-hmm. I'm just taking a stab at the officer for the leadership office. Mm-hmm. What kind of a person is he likely to be who can deal with wicked problems? I think it's likely to be a person who questions everything and worships none. This person is likely to be adventurous and flexible. That's the kind of a leader that we need today. This person is likely to be wild and peaceful at once. He can manage, or she can actually be both at one time quite comfortably and not experience any dissonance whatsoever, because one accepts that that's just the way things are. This person is likely to be inclusive and inspiring. This person is likely to have gone beyond the imperial consciousness or the socialized tribal thinking. This person can transcend and see the big picture and see into the future. That's the officer for the leadership office. Just looking at those two person specifications, the man in the corner office and the officer for the leadership office, you will notice that in the left, the man there is losing it. The hair is falling away. It's the same guy actually on the right. He's having a transplant and he's gaining it. I don't know whether it's a painful process. It must be a painful process. I have lost all my hair, so I can't say. But anyway, carrying on. As we wind up, or as I wind up, let's just see if I can give you some takeaways, the things that you might want to take home and eat. 3 things I would say. from what I've been saying. The first thing is that for fitness and potency, never arrive. Never assume that you know, not in this world, not with the kind of wicked problems that we've got to deal with. You can never say I'm an expert or I've arrived. Forget it. Second point is perpetually renew yourself and your teams, because the dynamics are such that things are changing all the time. But I think also the one part which we always forget is point C. Beyond consciousness is the conscience. We've been talking about conscious and conscious, but how about the conscience? The conscience really is the morality. Is it right? Is it wrong? Those are the three things that you may want to take from this discussion or from this talk. I'm going to also just conclude by saying, make it personal. I believe in leadership. There are a lot of theories which are actually questioning whether leadership actually applies or not in this day and age. I believe in leadership. I'm also biased towards mission. It's a bias that I have. I believe that we have got to have a cause. If we don't have a cause, we've got no place in leadership. It's a bias. I'm not saying it's the truth. I'm going to take you through my own dream. I have a dream of a new generation of African decision makers, new value systems, new dynamics, new technologies for exercising intelligent choices, shaping the complex and high-stakes leadership decisions. I have a dream that one day we will be able to raise our leadership to live up to its true meanings and purposes. That the organization and nation where workers and masses are sweltering in the heat of misdirection and oppression will be transformed into oases of well-being. That African leaders will one day lead organizations and nations that will be judged in the international space, not by their continent, but by the content of their character and the excellence in their deeds. I have a dream today that one day, down the corridors of power, where the autocrats rave, their lips dripping with words of interjection and rejection, that one day, right there, the masses shall sit at the judgment tables and serve as recognized co-creators of value and well-being, and take turns in leading thriving enterprises and nations. I have a dream today that one day, every African valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the continent shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope as leadership midwives. Indeed, I believe, memory, that we are leadership midwives. We bring up, we don't give birth to them, we only are midwives. This is the faith that we live to. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our continent into a beautiful symphony of humanity. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to struggle together, knowing that we will prevail one day. And if Africa is to be a great continent, this must become true. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mushayandebvu. There are lots of lessons there. I will allow people to ask questions, but before they come in, while they're preparing their questions, they can put their questions on the chat. But I want to ask you a few questions, maybe two of them. The first one, you talked about the developmental stages that you talked about. And I think it was stage 2 where you said about 6% of adults are actually in there. What is the significance of that, where you have adults who are in the primitive stages of those development stages in terms of impact on business, in terms of impact on leadership? That's question number 1. Question number 2 you also did mention that you must question everything and worship no one. In terms of you talked about personality and the people being different. Very few people have got that kind of courage to be able to question everything and worship no one. Can you give context to that? How would people, the lesson that they can take? Because my own experience is that people keep quiet when things go wrong because they're obviously trying to protect their own roles. But in the end, everyone get damaged in the process. They don't see it that way. So if you can also talk to that. While I'm waiting for other questions, you can put your questions on the chat, but also I'll open up maybe for about 5 minutes, an opportunity for people to directly ask questions directly to Mr. Mushayandebvu. You can go ahead.
Thanks for that, Memory. Let me start off by doing something I didn't do right at the very beginning, to say, I'm talking about a leader. I'm not talking about managers. Mm-hmm. Having put that, having said that, and here I'm saying leaders are not necessarily working with given operations. They're actually generating operations. Mm-hmm. They are not maintainers. They are actually the transformers. Now, having said that, or having come up with that simplistic distinction between leadership and management, your first question, very pertinent. What's the consequence of having a leader who is in an adolescent stage? I think the illustration is very clear. You don't want a kid. We don't want an adolescent running an organization, but in reality, we do have. And I've seen that kind of, I've experienced that kind of behavior amongst the leaders, where a person really is saying, I'm the center of everything. Everything is around me. Likewise, also, even those who are socialized, who are in the tribal stage, so everything has got to do with us, Vahera, the people from Buhera, where I come from or where I originated from. It's all about Vahera, or it's all about us blacks. That kind of tribal mentality, that's the same tribal mentality that Hitler used when he was saying the Germans. That kind of consciousness is not helpful at all. Maybe very simplistic illustrations, but I like the idea that, in fact, one is talking of infantile or adolescent and tribal. Ideally, obviously, you want a socialized mind, but even then you realize that no, socialized is not good enough, particularly when we've got a mission to do good to humanity. You probably need a self-transforming mind. Now, you need a lot of effort there. Now, that I think also leads to the whole idea of, can people change? Keegan and Leahy definitely say it's not easy. People don't want to change their identities. And oftentimes you hear leaders saying, people, they know me, they know I'm like that. Or take me as I am, I'm the boss anyway. That's not very helpful. That's actually an adolescent way of looking at things. You can actually change. And if you say, if you commit yourself and you have got the right supports, the intrapersonal change can take place, but it's not easy, Memory. You are very right there. It's not easy. And that's where, that's the area that, the coaching area that, you know what, we don't want this to be, we mustn't assume that it's best done by industrial psychologists. I actually personally think that this is clinical psychology at its best. Or at least if you bring clinical psychology into industry, that's one area where you can bring about that intrapersonal change. I'm over elaborating in Memory. I don't know whether I've answered you. Do I have you, Memory? Are you there, Memory?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I was reading a comment. So sorry, I was muted.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, let me read the comment again. Let me read the comment again. It says, certain people should never assume leadership roles as they are inclined to narcissism and cripple the organization, cripple others. Then the other, this one is a question: what happens if one is that age to exercise his leadership roles yet engaged with the government or state entities where we know our emotions have no room for the decision? Rather, it's the prime master who does that. I think they say the person saying, if I work in a state entity where probably things are very rigid, how do you transform yourself to be able to deliver in terms of what you have said?
My basic premise or my argument basically is that as leaders, we need to self-introspect. I think the term that is generally applied is that of reflexivity, where you have got to turn the lens and look at yourself and say, what am I doing? Because if you cannot if you cannot examine yourself, how you're doing things and how your processes are, you're not going to change. You're going to just deliver exactly the same thing, and you're not going to be effective. I think that's the basic argument. Mm-hmm. And I tend to agree that there are certain people, if they are not willing to change, who should never be in leadership. And that's the challenge that we have when we are selecting or when we are developing. If a person is a Nazi, for instance, I like that. It might be very blunt, but I think that's the correct term, really. Do you want a Nazi in leadership? No. And a Nazi basically is someone who either is at an adolescent stage or at the very best at a tribal stage of consciousness. You ideally don't want that. Now, let's also be fair. This process is not easy. And it's something that it's like an OD intervention. You can't have one person changing and the rest of the team is not changing. I've been talking, I mean, the theory is coming out now that in fact, leadership is not necessarily in the corner office. Leadership is in all of us. If you look at organizations as being complex adaptive systems, the systems that are, everything is interlinked. Leadership is not necessarily vested in those who have got the authority or who are managers or who are bosses. It's in everybody. Now, when you look at it like that, those whom we pay or whom we overpay to be leaders, really it would be ideal for them to go through these kind of intrapersonal changes to self-introspect to become more effective. But it's not easy because it's very, very threatening. I will end up getting lost in my own answer here.
Okay, that's fine. Let me get a question from Prosper. Your hand is up. Prosper, unmute yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Memory. Thank you, Mushayandebvu. I enjoyed your presentation quite a lot. I wanted to ask leaders in industry today. I'm talking about professional industry, where a person goes through college, for example, goes through nurturing by parents who give them rules to live by and not to live by. They join professional organizations that preach ethics and professionalism, and yet that person still gets into industry and becomes a Nazi, like you said, or multi personalities, to the result that in the end they become like the leader that you are talking about. What is it in your opinion, maybe as a psychologist, a natural practitioner, that the training institutions and the professional organizations are failing to instill in individuals so that they become proper leaders?
Let me answer your, thank you very much for the question. Let me answer it indirectly and say, what we are lacking today is institutes of unlearning. We have got too many institutes of learning. What is lacking is unlearning. So we need to unlearn things that we were taught by mommy and daddy. We need to unlearn what we learned at university. We need to actually experience reality as it is, because things are changing far too quickly. The concept that we had of organization is not as relevant. Look, maybe I'm generalizing here, but if we are talking leadership, definitely you are better off in an institute of unlearning rather than an institute of learning, which is sad, because why then spend 2 years or a year doing an MBA if I'm saying no, rather go and unlearn. But that's the challenge. And I'm saying unlearning basically simply means that you've got to be learning all the time, and you've got to examine what you're doing and saying, is it working? Is it not working? Why is it not working? What is driving me? Now, there are not too many people who are capable of doing that. Most of us are groomed to go into the corner office And the challenge I'm giving to memory is that, you will need guys who sit in the corner office. But if we are not injecting good enough guys who are officers for the office, for the leadership office, we are doing organizations a disservice. I repeat that. In fact, to me, the big challenge is we don't have enough institutes of unlearning. We've got too many institutes of learning.
Okay, that's very interesting. So most of the people are actually building institutes of learning, not of unlearning. So the old habits never go away. So you're piling new things on old habits.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is not helpful. Look, it might sound cynical and the like, but honestly, in the information age, in the age where there's computers and things like that, things are happening so at an exponential rate. And what we need is an MBA, which is not done in 2 years. What we need is an MBA. In fact, we don't need an MBA, in my opinion. I think we need to come up with a frame where people just need to know how to learn, how to understand themselves and to understand their environments. Because once you've got the knowledge, it becomes obsolete, or it can really become the stumbling block, the thing that is making you not see what is happening there.
Okay, thank you. The last question, then we close the session. This one is Tendai. It says, thanks for the presentation. Alois, what can be done to facilitate change? There is a popular view these days that the generation ranging from 55 to 65 years is stuck in its ways and cannot change. What's your take on this? Ultimately, this lack of flexibility hampers progress and improvement. That will be our last question, then we'll close the session.
Again, a very interesting question. And again, I will also not answer it directly, but let me hopefully in my response, be able to partially answer that. The first thing that I would say is that a lot of theories of human development always tend to link up particular ages to this kind of developments. And I think they are right, but they can also be misleading, because you will find that, like for instance, we have got Generation Z, we have got the millennials. These are the young. I think Generation Z are the youngest generation that we have. And the millennials are like most of my kids. And then some of us are from the 60s, the days of Elvis Presley and the like. And we probably are stuck in our ways of doing things, but I can assure you I've come up with some 60s guys who really behave like Generation Z, moving around with headphones in their white headphones in their ears, and they work whilst they are listening to music and the like. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying, indeed, we need to pay attention to the fact that the solutions that we used to have may no longer be appropriate. And we probably need to give more space to these so-called Generation Z, millennials, and the younger generation, assuming that, in fact, they are not necessarily just mimicking what we were doing. Because honestly, what my father used to believe was the right way of doing things, it's irrelevant in this day and age. And I think a lot of my thinking is really also equally irrelevant. The worst thing about the way sometimes we bring up our kids is we don't teach them to formulate problems and generate solutions on their own. We give them the solutions. We teach them, we give them the fish. We don't give them the fishing rods. That's the challenge that we have maybe in the academia, in the way we should bring up our children. This is a very exciting question, and I'm going to very soon lose myself. I hope my response partly answers that question. A very, very interesting question. I know I'm not done it justice.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mushayandebvu. I think we've come to the end of the session, almost an hour, 4 minutes that we have had with insightful presentation from yourself. I hope I can call you again in the future on other interesting topics. This is very interesting. At the peak, we had about 39 participants out of the 46 participants that had registered. And that's a good number for an hour, 1 hour presentation. Very, very, very insightful. Thank you very much to the participants. We'll share the link to the recorded presentation for you, which you are free to share in your circles once we give you the link. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.